All right, so we're going to be beginning a animal portrait. Remember, monochromatic is one color with black and white. It's what we did with the face in watercolor. And we're going to be using an animal this time. So I've chosen my animal and I've printed it in black and white. All birds, so I do have the whole animal, but if you're doing something else, like here's a sloth, it's just like think of it like a portrait. So mostly the head and the neck of whatever animal you choose. Before we go ahead and move on and draw, to paint and transfer the animal, I have found that it helps to do a value matching activity. Using the color that you're going to use for your animal portrait. So I am going to use red. So right here, I'm going to end up painting on one of these and like putting little dots of value or paint on the other one. So I'm going to identify which of the grays is the color. So red is a fairly middle of the road kind of color. Some of the blues can go down a little bit further because they don't have as much range in terms of making them darker. Versus the red. Red will get darker just fine. It'll also get lighter. So I am going to paint that square red. And now down here, I'm going to identify where I see this particular gray on my drawing here. So here is something a little different. So this gray, this particular gray is all of these places. And so now when I come out here to paint this one, I know kind of where the value is going to be. So I'm going to do that for each of the values that I see here. So mixing a tiny bit of white in red, so it lightens up just a little bit for the next here on my value scale. And the camera wants to make everything a little darker than it is. So, you know, moving in, this next value is some of these other spots. I'm going to add a little more white. So I'm just gradually in the white. Bumped that one and I didn't need to. Gradually adding the white to make this value scale kind of work here. So now we're at this lighter color. I can see we're at that next lighter value on the scale. So one of these is going to have little bumps and one of them will actually be painted in. So I'm going to go ahead and just start to paint this in now. So I think you have sort of the idea with just a few reminders. So it's always easier to paint, which I haven't done, of course, right? I've gotten started here with just my value, my color. And the color is always easiest to blend from light to dark. So you can see I'm trying to work fairly fast so that my my paint is fresh and I don't end up with stripes on my sphere. So this is good practice for when we switch and do the animal. Like there won't be stripes on your animal. We'll want to make everything shift really nice and gradually. So now I'm going to shift to some of my darker colors. That got dark really fast. The black, remember, is always so much more powerful than any of the other colors. So making careful with the black so that it doesn't too quickly overtake the color that you're working with. Just trying to gradually mix that color so that I don't have the stripes. but I have that sense of value that's there. I am going to paint this in completely. Okay, so there's a finished example over on the board. So again, I stopped working on the sphere and moved to background because it's easier to go from the back to the front. Remembering that from the apple, it's how we'll work now on the animal too. So I have a dark red here. This gradually lightens it up as I move across. So I just grabbed some red paint. Going to kind of keep that whole background, just the red with a little bit of black that gets mixed in. So remember down here I had daubed that value and now it's here on my painting. I'll switch to a little bit lighter. Add some white in. This is really, we'll get that nice contrast then off the back side of that sphere. Probably add more white. Again, I'm trying to work fast to kind of blend that color together gradually, make that gradual shift from the one color to the next color so that we don't have any stripes. So as I start to get a stripy spot or a spot that changes color, just gonna go in, wet my paintbrush, more gradual. Could add a little bit more white back here still. And then go back to working on my sphere. Making sure, and this is super important, we're gonna be making animals, so making sure that you're paying attention to the direction that you use your paintbrush. We talked about that a lot when we worked with the apple. Paint really matters, so I'm making sure that I'm curving my brush strokes as I wrap around my sphere. I don't want any straight lines on this round object. When we paint our animal, we're going to be really conscious of that as well, because a lot of times you have to paint like things like fur and feathers in the direction that goes on your animal in order to make things look super realistic. So here you see how quickly my red takes over the white that was there. Gonna quickly take over this darker area as well. Come back with a little of my highlight. So I'm just gonna work to perfect this before I move on to my end. Once I really feel like I've got all of the values exactly where they should be, that is when I know that I'm really ready to move on to my animal painting. Now that got too pink again. So you can see I'm going to have to kind of adjust a little bit back and forth to work out where some of these values should be on this sphere. I'm going to continue to work my way down and around. So everything, nothing will be just black, nothing will be just white. Everything will be partially and somehow my color. Once I have finished this sphere, I can go ahead and transfer my animal. So the animal that I have picked for this project, I can go ahead and transfer that to a piece of the canvas. Remember that the canvas, kind of wet still, maybe not quite as right as I want it to be, but I think you get the idea. Remember that the canvas needs to get taped to a board. So I've taped it to a scrap. There are plenty of scraps over there, or some of you even kept the scrap. You can check your folder to see if you have transfer paper left over from a watercolor painting. You know, some of you guys hung on to a piece of transfer paper. Otherwise, there is transfer paper over on the side counter. Remember, it is darker side down with the transfer paper. I don't want to tape too much of my canvas. I want my canvas to pretty much be the size of my sheet of paper. I'm going to trace shadow shapes, the highlights that I think I need, so that my drawing is complete. As complete as I possibly don't want to worry about the background. Okay, so I don't need any of the background. Obviously my animal is sitting on something, so I need that part. You'll need some sort of context for your animal, and then when I start to paint, I'm first going to paint the background. I want to think about the values that are going to need to be on my animal itself, and how I'm going to change the value of the background paint work with my image. So I am actually going to use that tone idea. So remember when you did that kind of flower petal design and you mixed with gray. I am mixing up a gray that I'm going to put a little bit of red in, and I'm going to use that in my background. So I have this gray, kind of a gray red that I'm going to use, and that will be the very first thing I do, is the background space back here. With just like when we did the apple, I want to think about how I can mix my colors together. So I'm going to kind of shift and change the color as I go. I'm going to add in a little bit more white, and I'm going to add in a little bit more red, so that it's not all the same color in my background, but I have some variation in that background color. So you can certainly mix with grays, you can just go with black and white. All of that will work. But you want to make sure that the value of your background is going to be different than the value of your animal's thing. If I paint my background red and then I'm going to need to use the red on my owl, I won't have any separation between the background and my animal. So I can see that the feathers are kind of brighter on this side, so I'm going to paint this. The background over here is going to be the little bit darker section of the background. Lighten up the background a little bit as I move across the page and into the other side. All right, so background first if you get to your animal transfer.